The text arrived between helping customers at my boutique. I'm leaving you and moving to the city with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Ha! My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf. The only sign that my husband of 8 years had just nuked our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my response. Good luck. My name is Natty, and at 38, I just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Greg was probably gloating over his grand exit, imagining me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work that never matched his paid deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously, buying new clothes, trying to recapture his youth. 3 months ago, I'd found a receipt for dinner for two at an expensive restaurant on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That same evening, I'd opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he mentioned wanting to combine our accounts to simplify things, I'd agreed cheerfully while moving my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he just emptied? It contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious. About 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Her and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Kira, the new receptionist at his office. I'd met her at the company Christmas party, watched her laugh too loudly at Greg's jokes, noticed how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I'd found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move. The papers are ready, she replied. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in New York? No rush. Let him think he's won first. Another text from Greg. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful boutique I'd built from scratch. The one that generated more income than his middle management position. The one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in New York. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house, my house, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother and kept it in my name, despite Greg's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need, I found our wedding album. Greg looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days, he wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man of 43. My phone kept buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. I've been planning this for months. Kira understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I took screenshots of every message, adding them to my growing evidence folder. Let him keep digging his own grave. My attorney would have a field day with his casual confession of premeditation and his smug little announcement about draining our account. Then, one message caught my eye. By the way, I used the joint credit card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it a farewell gift. LOL. Perfect. I dialed the credit card company. This is Nettie Carter speaking. I need to report fraudulent activity and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can you specify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to New York, booked today, a hotel reservation at the Azure Haven Resort and Spa Resort. And I need my husband removed as an authorized user. Do you have proof of the fraud? Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint account to fund his trip with his mistress after draining our savings. I can send them over now. The customer service rep stayed professional, but I could hear the subtle satisfaction in her voice as she canceled the charges. Tomorrow, Greg and his little fling would show up at the airport to find their tickets voided and their luxury suite unavailable. My phone vibrated again. Don't stress about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find a smaller place. I actually laughed. Did he really think he had any claim to my mother's house? Had he convinced himself that our home, my home, was his to give away? Another message popped up. And I know how much your store means to you. We can figure out a fair buyout for my share. His share of my business? The one I'd built from scratch, funded alone, nurtured while he rolled his eyes and called it my little side project? I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle I'd been saving for a celebration. This moment counted. Tomorrow, Greg would get a crash course in real estate law and separate finances. But tonight I'd relax and start planning the next chapter of my life. Morning arrived with a storm of increasingly frantic messages from Greg. What the hell did you do to our credit card? The airline won't issue our tickets. The hotel canceled our stay. Answer me. I silenced my phone and got ready for the day. Saturdays were always busy at my boutique, and I had a fresh shipment of luxury handbags to unpack. Life moves forward, even when your husband runs off with a girl half his age. Around noon, his mother called. Natty, sweetheart, I just got off the phone with Greg. He told me everything. How distant you've been, how he felt unloved, how you're being spiteful now, interfering with his trip. I set my phone on speaker as I adjusted the window display. Did he also mention draining our bank account and charging a vacation for him and his mistress on our credit card? Silence. Then, well, he said you left him no choice, that you've been cold for months. Cheryl, I have screenshots of every text he sent. Would you like me to read them? The one where he brags about stealing our money? Or the one where he mocks my age? Another pause. He did sound a little mean. I told him that wasn't very kind. I appreciate the call, Cheryl, but I think it's best if we end this here. My lawyer has advised me to keep contact with Greg's family to a minimum during the legal process. Legal process? Already? Goodbye, Cheryl. By late afternoon, the gossip mill was in full swing. According to our mutual friends, Greg and his mistress, Kira, were stranded at a rundown airport motel. Their private getaway had turned into a nightmare. He had attempted to use his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag I'd noticed. Then my attorney called. We have an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of clearing the joint account and the credit card fraud, we have a strong case to freeze any remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet, but the papers will be waiting for him at his new motel address. Oh, and Kira's social media has been a goldmine. She's been posting about their adventure all day. Lots of incriminating remarks about you. I smiled, thinking of my own stack of evidence. Months of suspicious charges, hotel bills, and texts that spelled out intent. Greg had been so caught up in his grand escape that it never occurred to him that I was watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed with another text. You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, adding it to the ever-growing file of Greg's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I could have hoped for. Greg showed up in his new wardrobe, designer jeans a little too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Outside the courtroom, Kira waited, her youth painfully exposed under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer presented our case methodically. Greg's smug text about draining our account, his credit card fraud, a documented history of hidden expenses. Each piece of evidence was carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Greg's hastily hired lawyer began, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Carter's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? My lawyer raised an eyebrow. You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business. The judge reviewed the documentation, my separate property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name alone, the clear separation of business and personal finances that Greg had always mocked as obsessive. Mr. Carter, the judge addressed him directly, you admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Greg shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make a clean break. By committing financial fraud? The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to a business that documentation clearly shows is separate from marital assets? The business grew during our marriage, his lawyer tried again. My client is entitled. The business was established before the marriage, my lawyer interrupted. And Mrs. Carter maintained strict financial separation throughout. We have records of every penny invested and earned. I watched Greg's expression shift as reality set in. He thought this would be easy. Empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe walk away with half my business in the divorce. He had never understood why I insisted on keeping everything separate, why I refused to mix personal and business finances. He had even laughed at my meticulous bookkeeping. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, the judge announced. All shared assets will be frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Carter is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Greg's face paled. But that money's gone. We spent it on. Then I suggest you find a way to replace it, the judge cut him off. And Mr. Carter, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with a paramour. Outside the courthouse, I caught a snippet of Kira's voice. So, what about New York, our getaway? Greg's response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked away. Back to the business he had never understood or respected. The next few weeks brought a series of increasingly desperate moves from Greg. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea, that he had invested money in its early days, that he had always been my silent business partner. Each claim was swiftly dismantled by my records. He's scrambling, my lawyer observed. And from what I can see on Kira's social media, they're staying at her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined. Greg's family started reaching out, their tone noticeably different from before. We had no idea, his sister Mara admitted. He told us you were cold, controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw the texts. The way he bragged about taking your money, that's not the brother I thought I knew. Even his mother called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that. At least I thought I did. I let her call go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago. Now, it just felt like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Ironically, the boutique thrived during all of this, boosted by local gossip. Women started coming in specifically to show their support, often leaving with far more than they had planned to buy. My ex pulled the same stunt, one customer confided while purchasing a designer handbag. Thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. My phone still buzzed occasionally with messages from Greg, his tone swinging wildly between anger and manipulation. You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support. I forwarded each message to my lawyer without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard Kira was having second thoughts. Apparently, sharing her tiny apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she had envisioned. The age gap that had once seemed thrilling in secret hotel rooms now looked much different in the harsh light of day. She's been posting about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes, my lawyer mentioned during an update call. And she removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt sorry for Greg. Almost. But then I remembered his smirk after telling me he had emptied our account. The casual cruelty of his comments about my age, the way he assumed I'd be lost without him, was once infuriating. But instead of resentment, I felt something else. Pride. Pride in my foresight, in my quiet resilience, in my ability to protect myself while he remained blind to the consequences of his arrogance. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Greg's imagined triumph. His cocky attitude had vanished, replaced by barely contained panic. Kira was nowhere to be seen. She'd moved on to a coworker closer to her own age, according to office gossip. Greg, however, had shown up in his old clothes. His designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account he had recklessly drained. His lawyer looked exhausted, likely from trying and failing to find a loophole in my documented separation of assets. Your Honor, Greg's lawyer tried one last time. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the success of his wife's business through moral support. My lawyer didn't even try to hide her amusement. Moral support? She held up a printout of text messages. Like these? Calling Mrs. Harrington's boutique a little vanity project? Or these social media posts referring to it as her hobby? The judge had seen enough. The final settlement reflected my meticulous planning. I kept my home, my business, and my separate assets. Greg got his personal belongings and his car, now worth less than what he still owed on it. You've ruined me, he hissed as we left the courtroom. I'll have to move back in with my parents. No, Greg, I said calmly. You ruined yourself. I just made sure you couldn't ruin me too. His mother stood outside, keys in hand, ready to drive him back to her house, his new home at 45. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had mocked my age was now sleeping in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running a thriving business. You planned this all along, he accused. You knew this would happen. I shook my head. Number, I just paid attention, and unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records. His mother stepped between us. That's enough, Greg. You've embarrassed yourself enough already. As they walked away, I heard her scolding him. Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old? Emptying bank accounts? Those horrible texts? I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Greg had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that smug text. Instead, he had only set my carefully laid plans in motion. My phone buzzed, not with messages from Greg this time, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he had imagined. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Greg struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he had dismissed was thriving. I had hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining national traction. Meanwhile, news of Greg's downward spiral trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He had tried dating apps, but women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man still living with his parents. Younger women, having heard the office gossip, or worse, seen screenshots of his desperate messages to Kira, avoided him entirely. Even his career had taken a hit. HR had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he had been expecting went to someone else, someone without a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Mara, his sister, told me during an unexpected visit to my boutique. She ran her fingers over a silk scarf, avoiding my gaze. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see Mara in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Greg had alienated his own family. I know we didn't support you at first, she admitted. He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. My lawyer kept me updated on Greg's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was swiftly denied. His claim of unfair distribution was dismissed outright. His own actions had painted a clear picture. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, my lawyer told me, laughing. The judge asked if, made theft any less illegal. As my boutique's success grew, so did the recognition. Local business magazines reached out, eager to feature my story, not as a scorned ex-wife, but as a savvy entrepreneur who had protected her interests. Young business owners asked for advice on keeping personal and business finances separate. The best protection is preparation, I told one woman who reminded me of Kira, and always trust your instincts. Greg's mother called occasionally, usually after he had done something particularly self-destructive. He had tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial troubles. Then he got involved in a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. Each attempt to reclaim his former lifestyle only pulled him deeper into a mess of his own making. I don't know where we went wrong with him, she sighed during one call. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he would just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. You, Nettie, His company, the judge. I listened politely but kept my distance. Their family drama was no longer my concern. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third boutique location and a potential expansion into luxury accessories. The only reminder of Greg's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number. Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age. Beneath it sat my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. A year after the divorce, I hosted the grand opening of my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, but the story they wanted to tell wasn't about a failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Greg's betrayal had become nothing more than a footnote in my success story. During the event, Kira unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever, or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She hesitated at the entrance, clutching her purse like a shield. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me, about how you were cold, controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough." I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. "Those weren't his dreams, Kira. They were escapes. There's a difference." "I know that now," she admitted. Then, after a pause, she added, "He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. Thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I finally understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes." I actually laughed at that. "Let me guess, he had big plans but no way to fund them?" "Exactly. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a tiny apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager leaned in and whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied, smiling. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured toward a young couple admiring our designer handbags. "Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Greg's mother called one last time, not to discuss Greg, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Greg is still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems. But we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth boutique location. Greg had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model and take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger and more successful. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Greg filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that." I smiled, picturing him in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been decided the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. 2 years after Greg's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful business. During the Q&A session, a woman raised her hand. "My husband says I'm being paranoid. That marriage means sharing everything. Do you think I'm overthinking it?" "My ex-husband used to say the same thing," I responded, "right up until he tried to walk away with half my company during the divorce. Trust your instincts. Protecting yourself isn't paranoia." The boutique chain had expanded to 5 locations, each one more prosperous than the last. The small store Greg had once mocked now provided jobs for 30 employees and had been highlighted in multiple national publications. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard Greg had finally left his parents' house, moving into a modest apartment above a garage. After his old company downsized, eliminating his position in a corporate shakeup, he had to settle for a lower-paying job. His dating profile still described him as young at heart, though his profile picture was noticeably outdated. Ironically, Kira had become a frequent customer at my first boutique. She had earned a business degree and launched her own social media consulting firm. "You showed me what's possible," she admitted once, "that a woman can create something real instead of clinging to empty promises." The framed screenshot of Greg's cruel text message still hung in my office, not as a painful memory, but as a testament to my resilience. Below it, another sign read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood in front of my employees and loyal customers, reflecting on how far we had come. What had started as a single store had transformed into the flagship location of a thriving business empire. Greg's mother attended, though I hadn't invited her. She waited until the crowd thinned before approaching me. Smoothing the fabric of her designer dress, one she had purchased from my store, she said, "I saw Greg yesterday. He was reminiscing about his glory days, talking about the life he could have had. He still doesn't get it. He didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I thought of that text message, his casual cruelty, his assumption that I would crumble without him, the way he expected me to plead, to break, to prove him right. Instead, I had built something even stronger. Each new boutique was proof of what a woman could accomplish when she stopped dimming her light to make an insecure man feel bigger. A sales associate, coincidentally another young woman named Kira, approached with a question about the updated inventory system. As I explained the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store's glass window. I saw what Greg had failed to recognize 5 years ago. Not a woman aging, but one becoming wiser, more powerful, more successful. His cruel message had been meant as a final blow, a closing chapter. Instead, it had marked the beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who had heard my story and realized she deserved better than being reduced to someone else's midlife crisis.